A very common question is, how do I become the best? How do I become the best kickboxer, the best BJJ practitioner, the best fighter in the world? I want to become the best. What do I need to do? Well, today, I want to give you 5 reasons that you're probably not the best and you're probably not going to be the best. Now, before I get into this video is by no means to put any of you down. It's not to say that anyone's better than you. It's actually just meant to give you almost a bit of reassurance and a bit of a wake-up call that in order to be the absolute best at something, a lot of things need to fall into place, and not all of them are necessarily under your control. And as much as social media would like us to believe that if you just want it bad enough, if you just work hard enough, you can achieve anything you want, that's not always the case. And when it comes to combat sport, there are a lot of things that no matter how bad you want it, it might just not be in the cards for you. So if anything, this should be comforting that you should train, you should enjoy it, and you should strive to do great things. But don't feel like you've failed yourself or let anyone down if the end result of that is that you're not a world champion. And if you are, fantastic, but in the grand scope of things, just understand that there's probably a bit more to life. Let's get into it with number 1. And number 1 is your background and your upbringing. Now, this can swing both ways. 1, you could have had a really supportive, very amazing childhood. Parents that always told you that they believe in you, that you should believe in yourself, and they distilled in with you a natural confidence. That's a huge thing. Look at all the greatest fighters in the world. What are they all brimming with? Confidence. And a lot of the times when you look into it, it comes from these parents and these coaches that they met along the way that bred that into them. From a very early age, they were made to believe that they are something special and that they can do anything they want. To some extent, you could consider it a level of delusion, but it's a level of delusion that might be necessary in order to get you there. Now, on the other side of the coin, you could also come from a very rough background where no one believed in you, where nothing ever went your way. And what that distilled in you was this hunger to prove everyone wrong. You wanted to smash the haters, to destroy all the doubters, and this fueled your fire to take it to that next level. When other people couldn't, you dug that little bit deeper because you've already experienced a level of maybe emotional pain or trauma that they just can't contend with. Now, the problem for most people is you probably fall somewhere between that spectrum. You probably had relatively supportive parents, but they weren't telling you that you're the best thing since sliced bread. You fall somewhere in the middle of that, which is perfectly normal, right? Sometimes your parents tell you you're great. Sometimes your parents say stuff and it kind of hurts. That's the nature of the world. Maybe you had rough patches, maybe you had great times. It's gonna completely vary from person to person. So the chances that you fall into either of those extremes, which would be a huge part of your story, of the arc that made you champion, well, it's just not always that likely. Number 2, and again, this comes from your early years, or let's say your earliest years, your genetics. How built are you for this? If you look at a lot of the champs, genetically, there's something that stands out about them. Maybe it's a gas tank that just seems to be inhuman. Maybe it's as simple as they've just got an insane reach for their build, and their build comes into it. How much muscle can they hold on their frame? How much water can they suck out in a weight cut that allows them to come in at a heavier weight than their opponents? How quickly can they recover from that weight cut? A lot of this, there's obviously a science to how you approach it, your training regime, your tactics, your nutrition. But you can't lie that genetics play a huge part in the game, and that's just the card that you're dealt. You either have long arms or you don't. It doesn't mean you can't be good, it doesn't mean you can't be great. But when we're talking about what's the difference between number 1 and number 2, that little reach advantage or difference in weight or difference in cardio, well, that might just be enough to tip the scales. Number 3 is going to be your experience with injuries. And this is a huge one that people don't take into consideration enough. You might have all the right things going for you. You got the supportive family package, you won the genetic lottery, but in a training session, you break your neck. There's no coming back from that. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to recover to a point where you're going to be able to compete at that level again, if at all. And although that's an extreme example, a more common one is you break your ankle, you break your wrist, and you never quite get it to heal right again. And again, what we're talking about is up at that very top echelon of things. When we're at the extremes, if these are the little things that you've carried through your career and it's meant that your training has been compromised and your fights have been compromised, that can all add up in the long run. Now, people will always throw the example, and it's my favorite example to throw at people, of Michael Bisping, who was broken from top to bottom and missing an eye and went on to win the UFC championships. That's a very rare exception, and also look at the state of the man. His neck is messed up. His knees have been replaced. He's missing an eye. And I'm sure the list goes on of stuff that he doesn't even divulge because he's just that type of guy. But you can't base off your experience with the one exception to the rule that might be someone like the Count. Injuries are real, and sometimes people will use them as an excuse, and sometimes people will rehab and get back to 100% or learn a lot from them. But more often than not, injuries can be the thing that hold your journey back, and there isn't an awful lot that you can do about it. Number 4 is you're just not that competitive. I'm not saying you're not competitive. I'm saying that there are levels to being competitive. And I tell you, the big eye-opening example to me was, I went to a kickboxing competition maybe 10 years ago, probably even longer than that. I was a young guy, and I went with our team, and we'd spent all weekend competing. So Friday we got there, we fought Friday night, we fought Saturday night, we had guys fighting through the whole weekend. It was a whole weekend of intense competition. And if you weren't the one competing, you were supporting a teammate or cornering a teammate, we were in competition mode. Sunday night, the competition is over and we've gone out for a meal. And at the end of that meal, we've gone to this place for ice cream. Before you know it, it's turned into a 6-man competition of who can eat the most ice cream without being sick. And these guys are going to the point of basically giving themselves diabetes just simply because they're that competitive. They've had all weekend of it, they've had their fill. Anyone else would be like, you know what, I could do with a little less competition for a few days. They're straight back in there with ice cream and everything in between that. Competitiveness, that drive, that need to be better than everyone else in the room, not everyone has that. And that's a completely normal and healthy way to be, by the way. You don't need to be like that. And if you're not like that naturally, it's a very difficult thing to train into yourself. Finally, this is probably the biggest one. This is the one I tell people all the time when they get a little bit down in the dumps about how much they've managed to achieve in their given sport, is you have a life outside of it. You have other interests and other things that pull you in different directions. And this isn't to say that the champions of the world haven't had this. The fact is that you probably just get pulled a little more than they did. Your kids probably garnered a bit more of your time and attention. You have other hobbies that you enjoy doing. You have other friendship groups that you enjoy. You enjoy the idea of socializing more so than maybe putting in those extra hours of training, maybe traveling that extra distance to that competition, maybe finding those guys to make that team with and open that gym with. There's a whole lot that goes into it, and it's a very all-consuming thing. Being a fighter professionally is a very selfish endeavor. You need to focus so much on yourself in terms of your health, your nutrition, your training, your rest. It's very difficult to maintain other elements of life at the same time. It's the reason why most people only fight a few times a year, because if you had to do this all year through, you'd find it immensely difficult to manage your energy and manage the rest of your life at the same time. It needs to ebb and flow. And for the vast majority of us, there are just things in life that we enjoy as much or more. You might really want to be a world champion, but you want to play the guitar. You want to learn another language. You want to spend more and more time with your wife and with your children. And these things are perfectly okay. Again, not to say that champions are bad dads or bad mums, they don't spend time with their loved ones, not to say they can't have hobbies outside of it. It's just the more of that you do, the harder it is. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that this isn't your entire universe. So there we have it, guys. 5 reasons that you're probably not going to be the best in the world, but I hope also 5 reasons why that's absolutely okay and you shouldn't feel any two ways about it. Now, if you still want to go out there and try and be the best in the world, more power to you. Go get it done and then comment down below when it happens, because I will be super proud of you. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.